I think all of us remember where we were that day when we heard about the trade towers being attacked in New York City. And for me, one of the memories was I was actually in Winnipeg at the time and remember going, Osama bin Laden, because I started working with the persecuted church. But, since that time, there's been lots of fear. We talked off the beginning of the program, it comes to travel. I think in the economics in the world, there's a lot of fear. And joining us is Sean Speer. Sean, nice to have you along. Former advisor to Prime Minister Harper. Do you remember where you were when that happened?
I do. I just started university, as a matter of fact, and it was a moment that I'll never forget. A moment, of course, that has changed the way we think about economics, the way we think about politics, the way we think about national security, as you said. Something that no doubt has marked the early years of this 21st century.
Now, you're also the Munk Senior Fellow for the Fiscal Responsibility at Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Ottawa. You live here in Toronto. Globalization, that's what we thought we were headed for, and I know some, of course, that still is their desire to see that happen. But 9/11, what did that do to that whole thinking of globalization?
It's a great question. Remember, of course, that we had just gone through the end of the Cold War, and the 1990s were marked, I think, by a sense of triumph, that markets, that capitalism, that democracy was on the ascendancy, and that there were no real challenges to those institutions and those trends. I think 9/11 was a wake-up call for people in the West, that there were voices, that there were people out there that didn't sign on to this consensus, the end of history as it was described. And I think what we've lived through for the past 16 years is more and more evidence that those institutions, that those ideas aren't broadly or necessarily universally accepted. And I think that continues to be the case even here in our own democracies.
It seems that we go along kind of with whether we agree or disagree, don't say a lot. And then you have these cataclysmic, events like what happened at 9/11. And then people start to rise up. And I don't want to get into the politics of, the phenomena of Donald Trump being president or Brexit in the UK and then how that affected the European Union. But it is saying something, isn't it, about how people think about things when it comes to the economics of this world?
I think that's right. Before 9/11, I think the sense was that markets, democracy were perfect, that there were no issues, that there were no imperfections or blemishes. 9/11 was a signal that globalization can have negative or even evil implications, the extent to which the connectivity of the modern technology enabled this type of traumatic attack on our society, on our democracy. And since then, we've only seen more and more the extent to which globalization and markets and some of these other issues have imperfections. And we're seeing people push back, I think, against those imperfections. Last time I was on the program, I referred to a book by Irving Kristol called Two Cheers for Capitalism. Capitalism isn't worth three cheers. It's a great way of organizing our economy, allocating resources, but there has to be something deeper. There has to be more meaning, and I think that's what a lot of people are yearning for these days. And of course, it's something that this ministry is providing, is giving people, and why it's so important now more than ever.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it is a relationship with Jesus, and that's where people are trying to find it, whether it is, fixing the planet or globalization. But a lot of that whole understanding of globalization, I'm certainly not an economist like you are, but there needs to be cooperation, shared values. I mean, have we seen a time like in the United States with all that's going on there and the division, not only politically, but racially, and all these things are coming to the surface, and here in Canada as well. Does that then undermine the possibility of seeing the kind of globalization that those are pushing for that?
I would say two things in response. First of all, I think we need to be clear-eyed and honest about the strengths and weaknesses of globalization. There's no question that the trends that started in the 1980s and continued on through the 21st century have produced immense wealth and opportunity, particularly in developing countries who've seen a decrease in poverty, and it's unprecedented. So strengths and weaknesses of globalization, we need to be clear-eyed about that. Secondly, as you say, we can't be deterministic. We need to realize that economics rests on a foundation. It rests on this foundation of faith, of family, of community. and economics disassociated from those foundations, I'm afraid, can head in some very negative directions. And so, as you say, the type of discord, the type of disunity that we're witnessing, the type of distance we're seeing from faith, is something that will not just have cultural and spiritual implications, but could have economic implications. And I think it's incumbent not on our leaders, not on our political leaders, but on our faith leaders and on us as members of the community to re-engage with those foundations, because ultimately that's what this whole thing rests upon.
I mean, that is the ultimate too. Now, if Stephen Harper was still the Prime Minister, or the current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called you up, said, "Sean, I need some economic advice," as an overarching general thing, what would you say to him?
Well, I think two things. First of all, of course, the principal role of government is to protect our security. I don't think that's what prime ministers wake up thinking about and go to bed thinking about. That is the principal function of government. Mm-hmm. The second is to create opportunity, I think, for people to experience the dignity and self-actualization that comes with work, providing for oneself, providing for one's family. That's the second role of government. And I think 9/11 showed that we had made some mistakes, that there were some shortcomings with respect to the first. I think in a lot of ways we've shored up those weaknesses. You described the lines at the airport. I think in some ways those were a necessary response. And now I think it's up to government to focus on that second priority. How do we create opportunity for Indigenous people, for disabled Canadians, for the types of folks that have too long been marginalized from our economy? I think that's the advice that I would give this Prime Minister, and I hope that he takes it.
All right, thank you very much, Sean. There's some great advice there. And one of the things, whether you voted for Justin Trudeau or not, or your premiers, government people, the Bible says pray for them.